May Natural Monitoring Excel and Power BI user group. This is May 16th. Appreciate you taking time out today to join and attend. We really appreciate it. We don't take it for granted. There's plenty of other things you could be doing at this moment. You could be eating a sandwich, or you could be on mute eating a sandwich, or you could be doing something else. So we appreciate you being on today, and thanks for coming in and sitting in our group. Today we have an agenda. We're going through some announcements, job opportunities, talk about what's new in Power BI, Fabric, Excel, Power Apps, Power Automate, and then we have the great Michael Hewitt today talking about demystifying DAX and introduction data analysis expressions. DAX is amazing, Michael's amazing, so I'm really excited for this particular topic. So we talk about future meetings. On Thursday, June 20th, we will have Alex Kolokovi. Oh man, I messed that up. But we have Alex on here talking about KPI visualization and custom visuals. This will be virtual. Alex is amazing. I'm excited to hear his talk on KPI visualization and custom visuals. And then on July 18th, we are going to have a panel discussion. So this year is really flying, and we're like, man, it's been 6 months. Microsoft Fabric has been hot and heavy. There's been a lot of updates and stuff. So we want to stop and take a look back at the first 6 months of the year for 2024, have a panel discussion. What are some things that we like? What don't we like? What are we excited about for the rest of the year for Microsoft Fabric, and really get that up and running. So haven't figured out the panel yet, but if you're interested in being on the panel to talk about Fabric from your viewpoint, let us know. We're always looking for people to come and speak, but these are the 2 events that we have coming up. Call for speakers. So we're constantly looking for content creators, speakers. No topic is too small. If you wanted to speak, please let us know. More than happy to fill you in for the rest of the year, and even for 2025. If you need actual help, you're like, man, I really want to speak, but I don't want to do a whole session by myself, we're more than happy to help you out as well. We'll co-lead, co-speak, and get you up there. So let us know. Always look for speakers. Whatever the content is that you want to talk about, we're always looking for people to come and speak. So let us know if it's something of interest, and let us know. We're more than happy to help you out. All right, so SQL Saturday is back in action, hot and heavy. The next one that we have is July 26th, 27th at LSU. Fingers crossed they take my submission. I was just looking at it, but hopefully they take my submission and I have an excuse to go down to Baton Rouge. But if you're not submitted, or if you're not speaking, you just want to go to different SQL Saturdays, Baton Rouge is a great one. It's on LSU's campus, a lot of great content. Just a fun place to be at in general, especially in the summertime. It's going to be hot, July, it's going to be muggy, but LSU is fun. So if you're looking for an excuse to go and just look at more SQL Saturday, Microsoft Fabric content, this is a great one for you to go to and attend. Then we have Michael McKinley, Dashboard in a Day. Michael, if you want to come off mute and talk more about it, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Sekou. Really excited to put on, this is my first training, hopefully first of many trainings to come. This is a free all-day in-person event. Going to be hosting this Saturday, June 1st, 8 to 4. This is at the W. It's going to be catered. We're going to have snacks and lunch and so forth. We do have a full slate right now, but if you want to click on that link, scan the QR code, then just sign up. Let me know you're interested, and next time I do this training, I'll definitely reach out and have you at the top of the list. So, yeah, thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Great. It's gonna be awesome. A lot of content in a day. You're gonna go thinking you know Power BI. You're gonna leave absolutely knowing Power BI. So definitely go and attend. It's gonna be fantastic. All right, past Community Data Summit. So this is the big past summit. So we know about SQL Saturday, I just talked about at LSU, but this is the bigger conference that is available. There are other Microsoft conferences, but this is the past one that we do talk about in November. There's a lot of stuff out there that you can attend. I think there's some stuff coming up next month as well for Microsoft Fabric related that I don't have on the slide, but I'll make sure that I post it out there. But for this one specifically for past, November 4th through 8th, a lot of great content. I think the submissions to speak are over, but you can still actually go and just go. There's 2 days of pre-conferences, and then there's actual content throughout the conference. Seattle is great. It's a fun conference to attend. So if you're still looking for it, and then it's at the end of the year. So wherever you work at, they might have funds that they need to spend. So pitch yourself to actually go and have your company send you and be like, I went here and I know everything Microsoft Fabric. So this was a great investment, but definitely
your audio notice.
But now we can't see all kids.
Can you, I think, can you mute, please? Awesome. But past Community, great one to go to. A lot of great stuff there. All right, job opportunities. Right now, we're going to open the floor and see if there's anybody who has any opportunities open. Is anybody hiring? Do you know anybody in your network? Or are you looking for opportunities yourself? So we'll sit here for a minute or two to see if there's any opportunities. Feel free to come off mute or put it in the chat if you are hiring or looking for an opportunity.
I'll take a moment and promote myself, I suppose. Hello, my name is Douglas Bruce. I live near Nashville. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name. I'm new to data analysis. I've just taken a boot camp on it. And so I'm looking for an entry role, just about anything related to data, whether it was sales or manufacturing or financial. I want to learn more, and I'm looking forward to doing so.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Bruce. Well, Douglas Bruce, my bad. Thanks for the introduction on that and put yourself out there. So Adam on LinkedIn, I just sent you a message, so we'll connect as well. But Adam, look for him and think of opportunities. So anybody else? All right. So with that, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, my name is Wilson. Sorry, my camera wasn't on. I've been working as an actuary, and I'm trying to get into the analytics part. Have experience in SQL R and Tableau and Excel as well, and I'm just looking for opportunities to get into the analytics world in terms of data science and AI and stuff like that.
Awesome. Appreciate you, Wilson. If y'all both could do me a favor, just post your LinkedIn in the chat so people who are looking can find you online and connect with you. So with that, we will pass it to Eden Walker, who's on today, and have a slide. Eden, take it away.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'll keep it quick because I know there's other reasons y'all are joining, but yeah, I actually had the pleasure of working with Michael and recruiting him into his new role. But I work with Talistry. I'm an account manager here, and I've got Cameron, our other account manager here. We're a Nashville IT recruiting staffing partner. And yeah, I know this group seems like it's probably bigger than Nashville, but if you are in Nashville and you're interested in connecting, feel free to reach out. My contact information is right there. Or feel free to add us on LinkedIn. I did include some of the partners we work with. If these are folks that you've maybe been interested in, like seeing job opportunities and stuff like that, we've definitely got a lot of network in those organizations, and it can always help out. And then, yeah, lastly, I mean, this is why I included Cameron, but we got a few open opportunities. I wouldn't say they're maybe dead on like data analysts, all three of them, but all entail some sort of analytics background. The first of which I'm working on a mixture of both the business analyst / someone that's had some experience in Power BI, SQL, familiarity with SQL, for a healthcare SaaS company here in Nashville. And then Cameron working on a couple as well.
Yeah, so we're working on a data analyst and a data architect / engineer for a retirement system. They're got around 100 million they're budgeting or having their funds. And, you know, really they're going through a transformation of bringing new stuff on, and that's been a back end towards Snowflake and on the front Power BI. So to be able to visualize and help everything move better, that's kind of the route they're taking. So that kind of summarizes what we've been working on and, you know, roles we've kind of been around.
Yeah, so just wanted to give you all an idea of kind of stuff we're working on right now, kind of similar stuff. And yeah, feel free to reach out to either of us on LinkedIn. If you're in Nashville and or external, we work on remote opportunities as well. But thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. Appreciate y'all. These are great, fantastic opportunities out there. So if you have, if you want to hear more about it, like I said, mention and connect with them on LinkedIn, and get you right. So that's what we got. Appreciate you, Eden.
Appreciate you. Take care.
All right. So today we're going to talk about what's new in Power BI. So we don't have a release yet. This is the third week of the month, so May's release will come out soon. So with that, we're looking at April's release right now. Just to kind of reiterate what happened last month, there's a new visual that came out, 100% stack area chart, line chart enhancement. Some people are doing some really cool things out there. You'll see a lot of Copilot stuff. DAX query view is amazing. PowerPoint has some really, really cool stuff with storytelling. So you can do like a lot of slideshow, a lot of updates, a lot of refresh and different things. You can do mobile support. So one thing that's pretty cool now, I'll do a quick demo on it, but if you're not using folders in Power BI, start using them. They are really freaking cool. So if we're looking at Power BI and you're looking in your workspace, right now you go to your standard workspace, you have all your resources, whether it's your data flow, your pipelines, your actual workbooks, what have you, all in one single workspace. And at times it can get really cluttered and a lot of information can be really scattered together. So what they've introduced now is folders, is in preview. If you're not using it, like I said, highly recommend it. But if you go here and select folder, you can create a folder, call it whatever you want. You can call this Power BI stuff because I'm really great at creating names. But then once you come in here, you can move stuff to an individual folder. So if I want to move this data flow to my folder, I can select that and move it here. So now it gives you a little bit of capability to kind of organize different things in different areas. So if you want to put all your data flows in one folder, you can. If you want to put all your reporting in one folder, you can do that as well. It just kind of gives you a little bit way of just clean up stuff. So if you're not using folders, folders are really awesome from an organization standpoint. So now with the mobile update, you can actually support folders in the workspace as well. So if you're accessing Power BI for your mobile, you can now view those folders too. A lot of cool stuff with the actual matrix visual. This is actually coming in May's update, but there is something really cool here. If I can get out of this screen. All right, so there is a new feature with the Power BI matrix layout that's really cool. So by default, as you're probably used to seeing, you have the ability to do the compact view to where you're basically doing drill down. You select your arrow down, 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 or you can do your standard column as well. So you have it across the board and you're drilling down on each column. Some of the layout stuff that's really cool, there's now going to be a tabular layout where you have the ability to do a tabular mode and you can do like a repeated value. So right now by default, you don't have a repeated value down here, but with this new update that's coming, you now have the ability to actually tell it like, I want this value to repeat here and here for me. So one of the goals that they're trying to do is kind of mimic some of the Excel lookouts, look and feel. And if you've done stuff in Power BI before, you understand there's a lot of hacks at times because customers love Excel and they want to be this viewpoint. They want to look like it. So now this gives the ability from a tabular standpoint to kind of get back to that Excel look and feel. Another thing as well is the blank rows, which is going to be really cool, is that you can add a blank row for your subsections for each category. So again, trying to get back, the ultimate goal is to add these separators without having to create like these blank calculated fields or these different hacks that are in DAX. They're trying to make it a little bit more UX, UI friendly and make it easier for you to add some of this stuff. So I think it's a really cool update, more to come with it. I think one of the big pieces they're trying to say is that the request is, the familiar request is to export data from Power BI to Excel, right? We often deal with that, even though we make all these visuals and all this great stuff, we're like, I want to take it to Excel. So they're trying to basically align with the actual Excel product and do some of that stuff with the Power BI. So I think it's a really cool feature that's coming out. This article is, if you go or follow Power BI Core Visuals, they post a lot of cool stuff. I think it's like 6 or 7 people in that group where they're constantly trying to get as much stuff in the core components of Power BI without actually having to do a lot of hacks or a lot to do with custom visuals. So follow them. They have really cool stuff, but that's a really good update that I think is going to be really cool this month. All right, Fabric, a lot of great stuff in Fabric, mostly a lot of warehousing things, more to come for sure, but definitely customizable navigation pane, persistent filters in the workspace, more Git integration, partition, a lot of warehouse stuff. So now semantic link is available in GA for your data science component, data engineering, it's a lot of great stuff. Data Factory, there is fast copy, service principal authentication, and certified connector updates. So a lot of updates to get your information with Data Flow Gen 2. For me, Data Factory and Data Flow Gen 2 is like one of my favorite things of Fabric. It's just Power Query, but then you can write to an actual source. Makes life a lot easier. So I love these updates that are coming out. What's new in Excel? We have Excel for web, so a lot of Copilot stuff. Of course, everything's gonna be Copilot and AI. A lot of great stuff in Copilot that's out there, and then generating multiple formulas within Copilot is awesome. Same thing for Excel for Windows. Didn't have an Excel for Mac update this month, but those are some of the cool things that are out there. And then if you're doing stuff in Power Apps, there's stuff that went out there as well. So a lot of great stuff with Dynamics 365. Again, more AI with Copilot, a lot of that stuff. And Copilot's just going to be everywhere. You're going to see Copilot for the rest of the year in all these updates. And then Power Automate. So there is a variable picker that is there. IntelliSense is available. You can run a URL from your desktop flow. Any clear cells and Excel worksheet has now been introduced. So a lot of great updates there. All right, with that, I will pass it to Michael and take it away.
Thank you, Sekou. Share my screen. Guys, hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Let's see if this guy will behave now. All right. Maybe it will. There we go. All right. Well, it's good to see all you today. Thank you for joining us. We're going to dive into a topic today that if we really tried to quantify it, I think we could spend weeks talking about DAX. And by weeks, I mean we could spend our full 8-hour workdays getting together and having conversations about DAX if we go down every function and every rabbit trail with this. DAX can be a very big topic, but our goal today is to kind of help demystify DAX, give you a good introduction, give you a good foundation, and help some of those of you who are new to DAX or newer to Power BI or newer to Fabric understand how to leverage this and really unlock the potential of Power BI. So, little quick introduction on myself. I'm Michael Hewitt. I'm a Christian husband and father of 3. I'm originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, but have been in Nashville for almost 20 years. I manage the BI team at Hunt Brothers Pizza, and when I'm not working or with the family, we're heavily involved in our church here in Nashville, New Song Nashville. You may find me playing some drums, watching a little sports, but a big chunk of my life right now is raising up those kids, enjoying that, learning some cool stuff in the data world, and keeping things rolling forward. But that's enough about me. Oh, and I do get the privilege of co-organizing this user group. Been a part of this for a long time and just love being a part of this community. It's so helpful for all of us to get together. If you know me at all, you know that I'm a big believer in community and a big believer in all of us coming together, sharing our ideas and helping one another grow in whatever areas of life we need that. So thank you again for being a part of this today. But that's enough about me. I want to get to know you guys. So we're talking about DAX today. I want to get a sense of where you all are at. So you can join this little poll, and hopefully this is going to update for us. I'm kind of trying something new here. So I'll leave this slide here for a moment. And if this doesn't work, then drop maybe your experience level into the chat. Okay. All right. Getting a few of you in. Okay. No DAX ninjas so far, though. Okay. Okay. That's about the spread I would expect to see. Most folks consider themselves beginners or very new to DAX, with some others who are more experienced and looking to grow in their knowledge. Very good. So here's what we're going to talk about more specifically. We're going to do an overview of DAX. We're going to talk about context within DAX and why that's so important when we're writing DAX. I'm going to lay out a DAX learning path for you, one that I've found particularly helpful through my time working with DAX, which has got to be at 8 or 9 years now. I'm going to demo some DAX for you as well. We're actually going to take a look at Power BI and see how we can write DAX and how to get going with it. And at the end, I want to give you a couple tips and tricks and resources that will kind of help propel you forward in your DAX journey. So I've had the privilege of teaching DAX or having conversations about DAX in a lot of different contexts, whether that's been one-on-one with coworkers. I've actually been able to teach a couple different classes in workplaces that I've done, and in a prior job got to lead about 60 folks through some introductory DAX courses. And anytime we start talking about DAX, I tend to see a lot of faces that start to look something like this. Those people start to kind of freak out, like, whoa, hold on. If I'm going to be really good in Power BI, like I've got to write some sort of code or some sort of formula. I don't know about this. And maybe if the face doesn't look like this, starts to look a little bit more like this, people are going, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I want to do this. But what I'm here to tell you is that if I can learn how to do it, and I've successfully seen people that I've worked with learn how to do it, so can you. In fact, writing DAX is one of the more fulfilling parts, I think, of being a data analyst in the Microsoft space. And it's a very common sight, if you work with me, particularly in person, to see a motion kind of like this, because solving a DAX puzzle is like nothing else. And I wish I had a couple coworkers who could confirm I make this motion a lot when I'm writing DAX. So our goal is to get you from that cringy face into this. I just landed a big one, and we've taken the lead. Okay. So let's talk a little bit now about what DAX is. DAX itself is short for data analysis expressions, and DAX is a functional language. Really, all that means is that DAX is a collection of functions that we can work with, we can nest, we can leverage to manipulate our code or to manipulate our data model. Sorry, to get insights out of our data model. Okay, the syntax of it is actually very similar to Excel formulas. Now, they don't really operate the same. We'll get to see that in a little bit. But if you're familiar with Excel formulas, it's kind of a natural progression then into writing DAX. Okay, so we'll get to see that in a minute. And that's really, I think, by design, right? That Microsoft wants to take data analysts in their stack on a journey from working in spreadsheets to working in more powerful and more capable tools. Not that Excel is not capable, but some of these other tools, you can do a whole lot more than we can do with Excel. And finally, DAX is really created and specifically for working in data models. Okay, so that's a very important piece to consider here. Now, there are kind of times where people wonder, well, are there prerequisites then to writing DAX? Well, the good news is I don't think you have to have prior coding experience to be able to get into DAX. Since it's functional, it writes fairly easily. And because of that, any experience that you have working with Excel formulas in the past can be beneficial to you here. Because as we'll see in a little bit, again, that syntax has a lot of similarities to it. It's pretty easy to start to wade into DAX. Now, with that being said, if I were going to say that there's a prerequisite, it's that you should have a good, solid working knowledge of data modeling and of star schemas. Because once your data model is set up properly, once you've got a good star schema in Power BI, which Power BI loves for lots of reasons, this being one of them, that star schema, that good data model really opens up the playbook of DAX functions. It allows you to be able to do all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do if you're just working with a flat table. In fact, working with flat tables in Power BI there can be performance issues, but it can also make writing DAX very, very difficult, especially as you advance and want to write more complex DAX code. If you are still a little bit new to working with data models in Power BI, I'd recommend you go check out our presentation from last month in April, where Jason Romans did a great overview and dive into data modeling within Power BI. That would be a great foundation for you and give you a lot of the tools that you would need then to be able to dive in to working with DAX that we're going to talk about today. So who should learn to write DAX? I think this is a very simple answer. You should. Everybody should. If you're going to work in the Microsoft BI stack, if you're going to go beyond working in Excel spreadsheets, you should at least have a working knowledge of DAX. Whether or not you need to get to the most expert levels, if you need to become a DAX ninja yourself, that's really going to depend on what your role is and what your career aspirations are and where you're headed. But at least knowing some of the basics functions, how to utilize them, and how to employ them within your reporting will definitely make you a better developer, a better analyst in Power BI. So I highly recommend all of you learn at least some DAX. But you may ask, well, why? I'm not convinced yet. Just like writing Excel formulas really unlocks the power of the spreadsheet, when you start working in Power BI or one of the other tools that DAX can be written in, it's the same. The DAX is going to open up the possibilities of what you can do in a Power BI report, in a data model, built-in analysis services, or anywhere else that we can write DAX. You get a wide tool set of functions to be able to do a lot of really cool stuff that really works quite well. So more specifically, right, we're going to get over 250 DAX functions that we can work with. Knowing DAX is going to allow us to implement custom business logic within our data models. It's going to allow us to perform complex calculations that we just couldn't do if we're dragging and dropping fields into our visuals within Power BI. And if there's one in this list, this is the one, being able to utilize time intelligence functions. This would be the one that I would really say, this is the big one. This is why. There are so many great time intelligence functions in DAX that allow you to do all kinds of year-to-date and month-to-date and quarter-to-date and compare those to the previous periods. that could be some pretty complex code, but DAX has some built-in functions to make this easier for us. They're really powerful, and this is where the bread and butter is of DAX, in my opinion. But DAX gives us more opportunity than just dealing with, logic and calculations or measures. We can actually extend and, quite frankly, at times kind of hack some formatting options in our visuals by writing DAX. So you get in kind of the nerdy side of it, but if you're more creative and really love visualizing in Power BI, it's still worth knowing DAX to be able to give you more options on implementing some custom formatting that can't necessarily be done out of the box. So where can DAX be written? Well, it's all over the Microsoft BI stack, as I have mentioned. So we can write it in Power BI, and obviously then with the way Power BI and Fabric are tying together, we can utilize DAX within Fabric. We actually can write DAX in Excel if we're using Power Pivot for Excel. And DAX can also be written in analysis services tabular models, whether you're running those models in Azure or you've got a SQL Server instance stood up on a server or on a box somewhere else. So this isn't even an exhaustive list of where we can work with DAX. There's additional third-party tools that support or extend Power BI, for example, with DAX Studio or Tabular Editor, where DAX can be worked with. A whole host of other tools that allow us to work with DAX. But this list, I think, represents kind of the primary places that you would work with DAX. How we write DAX, or how an analyst should learn to write DAX, this is where things can really start to branch, because not to sound too consultant here, but it really kind of depends on what your goals are. With that being said, though, there are plenty of books and courses and different things that you can take to help you learn, but I think there's one key in learning DAX, and probably this applies to any coding language or any type of coding that you may run into. The best tip I can give you on how to learn DAX is the practice. And then when you think that you can't practice anymore, keep practicing. And then when you think, maybe I'm starting to get this, find a project that you can work on. Implement some DAX in your work. Implement some DAX in a passion project that you do on the side, and keep practicing. Because coding, writing DAX is really like a muscle. If you don't use it, you kind of lose it. So the more that you exercise it, the more you work it in, and the more you start to feel comfortable with it. Now we're going to take a look again at more specifics on how we can work with DAX and how to get started with it. We'll get to a demo in just a little bit, but I want to kind of lay out a few more things for you before we get to that demo. So there's a few different places once we actually start writing our DAX and we get into an analysis services model, we get into a Power BI model, we get into a Power Pivot model, that we can utilize DAX. The first and probably most common place you're going to work with it is by writing measures. Measures are flexible calculations that can be reused all over your model. So if you're building a Power BI model and you write some DAX measures, you can use that measure across all kinds of different Power BI visuals as many times as you need to. Of course, at some point, if you do it too many times, you may crash things, but I think that's common sense. You can also work with calculated columns. So this is where we can make a table of data wider, and we can do that within DAX. We can write a DAX expression that's going to give us that new that new column of data, and we're going to calculate whatever value should be there for every row in the table. Not only that, but we can use DAX to actually create entire tables of data. So within our data model, we can write DAX to go pull data from other tables and bring it together in a new calculated table. It's also possible to use DAX as a query language. So just like if you are using SQL to query a database, we can use DAX to query a data model and get results kind of in that temporary form, temporary view of that table, then export that into another place if we need to, or we can get our answer right from that query. Finally, probably the newest place that we can work with DAX is actually in visual calculations. Now, this is a very, very new feature. I think it's been out maybe 2 months. This is only going to be within Power BI, but we can actually create a calculation, write some DAX, and that calculation solely exists in one visual. We can't reuse it anywhere else in our model. It just happens at one place in a Power BI visual, a single Power BI visual. It's really, really cool and it can be very useful. But when you combine all of these things together, you can kind of see why people might make that face like, oh my goodness, this DAX is overwhelming because there's so many different places that we can use it. There's so many different things that we can write. And I want to add to that just a little bit here and give you a couple of warnings. If you're going to write a calculated column or a calculated table, be very cautious. Not that they're bad. There's not going to be Microsoft police come out and try and get you if you do write them. But there's other ways that we can create columns of data. There's other ways that we can create tables of data. And because of the way that Power BI works, because of the way that analysis services works and all the technology behind all of these data models, there's more efficient ways and more storage-friendly ways of creating these. Okay, Jason dives into that more in his talk on data models, so we're not going to get too deep into all of that today, but I just want to really just kind of issue that warning of only use these options when you don't really have another option. You're not able to add another column to your table in a SQL view or in a query or in the data source, even ahead of those things, or create your tables in your source database or in your source system. If you're not able to do that, that's a good place to use these. Okay. One of the big things that I think is the most important thing to understand when you start working with DAX is we have to start thinking about context. And there's a couple of main contexts that we're going to work with. And it's really, really important that we understand these because DAX can be used to create those different objects that we were just looking at, right? We can create a table. We can create a column, we can create a measure. And because those measures are so flexible, we can use them all over the place. We have to make sure that our measures can handle being used all over the place. Okay, so we really have to think and learn to think about how DAX thinks. We have to kind of understand what it's doing under the hood to be able to write effective DAX. So when we consider the context, the first type of context that we need to understand is filter context. I think Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari, these are the DAX guys. If you want to learn anything about DAX, you should be familiar with these two names. They literally write the book on DAX. And I think they define filter context very well. It's a set of filters applied to the data model before the evaluation of a DAX expression starts. Okay, I'm actually going to kind of show you what that looks like and how that works when we get into our demo. The other type of context that we need to consider is a row context. Okay, so in a row context, and we'll be able to look at this one as well. Some of the DAX functions that we have available actually go through a table of data row by row and complete their aggregation for each row of the table. And so to be able to do that, DAX has got to know what row it's working on. It's got to know I'm working on row 1 now. Okay, completed that aggregation. Now I'm working on row 2. Okay, I've completed that aggregation, and so on all the way down the table. For these functions to work the way that they're designed, Power BI or SSAS or wherever else we're writing DAX, it's got to understand where it's at. So for it to know where it's at, that's called the row context. Now, some of you more savvy DAX folks might be saying, wait a minute, you've forgotten one. Isn't there a new visual context? Well, yes, there is. With the introduction of visual calculations, there is a new visual context that's beyond the scope of our talk today. So perhaps there will be later DAX talks where we can dive a little bit more into that. But for now, these are the two ones, the two contexts for you to be aware of. So I want to lay out this learning path for you because I think it's good to get a little bit of perspective because DAX is so broad. There's so much that we can do with it. And I want to make sure we kind of break it down into some pieces to help you not feel so overwhelmed. And I'll just be frank right up here. I don't think this is the only way that you have to learn DAX. This is kind of a way I've walked people through it and have had some success with that. It's very similar to the path I took when I was learning to write DAX. The important part really is that you get a good foundation, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about DAX, really DAX 101, and then build on top of that foundation to satisfy the needs that you have in your particular role. So today, again, we're really understanding modeling. We're talking about syntax and very basic aggregation functions. We're going to look at some additional other functions like if and divide, calculate, some things that are very good foundational pieces of knowledge for you to have to get started writing DAX. Okay, so we're going to look at demos of all of those. But once you really start to understand the models, you start to think a little bit like DAX does. You get an understanding of what the DAX engine is doing that's running all of this code for us. Then we can start to build on top of that. We can actually start to do some more complex DAX code. We can introduce filters into our DAX. We can start then we can start looking a little bit more at those visual calculations and adding some additional understanding of visual context. We can look at these iterator functions that operate differently from the basic aggregation functions. And then we can get into a 300 level and start talking about time intelligence. That's hours of talks to really nail down that one because there is so much cool stuff there. And then once you get a good feel for time intelligence and working on that and implementing that into your report, we extend that a little bit. Start to talk about custom time intelligence, right? Because how many of us work someplace or have worked someplace where we don't follow a standard calendar? Maybe we have a fiscal calendar or some other type of operating calendar that our company uses. We've got to make sure that the time intelligence that we're presenting actually follows the calendar that's meaningful to the business. And so at times we've got to write some custom DAX to help us get the time intelligence that we need. We can look at implementing more complex DAX patterns and actually querying our data models and talking about calculation groups and some of the more specific nuances of DAX that allow us to become the DAX ninjas that I know all of you want to be. Okay. So everybody following so far? Any questions at this point? Cool. Let's jump over to Power BI then. And let's actually get into writing some DAX. So I've got a model here built based on a sample data set that Microsoft provides. And we are looking at green taxi data that's coming out of New York City. So basically what they've done is collected a few years worth of data on taxi rides. So we get to see where people are getting picked up and dropped off and how much that ride cost and how many passengers there were, all that kind of stuff. And so we're going to use this model to take a look a little bit deeper into what DAX is doing and how it's working. And we'll write a couple of aggregations here. And so to actually start this demo, I want to show you something that doesn't involve writing any DAX because I kind of want to drive a point home that we haven't really talked about to this point. But there's a couple of different ways that we can work with measures in Power BI. Okay, so when we're writing DAX, we call that an explicit measure. We are explicitly writing code. We are telling the DAX engine what we want it to do and how we want it to do it. Okay, but if you take like dashboard in a day, or if you go through some of the beginning learn modules that are available through Microsoft on Power BI, there's some other ways that they're going to show you to get aggregations. And those are called implicit measures. So let's just build like a simple chart here. And I'll show you what I mean by an implicit measure. So we'll add some data to our x-axis. And we'll just look at boroughs across New York City where people have gotten picked up. And let's just look at, actually, I'm just going to find, what's the field that I want to use here? This will illustrate the point. I just dropped a column of data into our chart and notice that by default, Power BI has said, all right, I see your column pickup location ID. I'm just going to count all the values in there. So we haven't written any DAX to get this aggregation. Power BI just assumed that we wanted a count and implicitly gave that count to us. Now we could change the type of aggregation. In this case, we only have two options, depending on the type of field that we drop in here. This is a text field, so we could change it to a distinct count. Okay, if I drop a numeric field in here, say the total amount that ride, that those taxi rides cost somebody. I get a few more options, but those are the aggregations that I'm limited to. Okay, so we could get a lot done by choosing one of these aggregations and see the results in our chart. But these implicit measures are limited because we're only able to aggregate with what's available based on the type of column we have and what's set by default as we drag different columns of data into our chart. So that's one limitation. The other limitation is that this is a one-time use. An implicit measure, we can't reuse that across multiple visuals in our model. And if we're going to tell a good data story, oftentimes that doesn't involve one single visual. We may need to look at, in this case, the total amount a ride cost across a lot of different dimensions, and we're going to need multiple charts to do that. So it's a bit silly to recreate this aggregation for every chart. We should just write a DAX measure that we can reuse lots of times. It's going to end up being more efficient in our model. It's going to be more efficient for you as you're developing the model to do that. So because of that, that's just one more reason that I suggest and urge you to consider learning DAX. And from this point forward, that's all we're going to do with implicit measures. We're going to start explicitly writing some measures. So if I wanted to create the same kind of chart with an explicit measure, I'm actually going to have to write some DAX. Fortunately, I've got a couple things already pre-written for us. And let's just take a look a little bit at the syntax of a couple of these so we can see what it looks like. And then we'll put it on the chart and you can see what it's doing. So the first one, I'm just going to look at this measure called taxi rides. All right, we get our formula bar and very simple. We've got the name of our measure equals, and now we're into the DAX. Now, in this particular example, this is an excellent function to start with, count rows. Very straightforward. Okay. And count rows. We're fortunate to have IntelliSense available here. That's going to give us all kinds of clues on how to use each of these functions and what requirements are needed to utilize these functions. Count rows literally just needs the name of a table. Very simple. So we'll enter the name of our table. And there's our measure. Now I'm ready to drop that in here. Come on, there we go. Boom. Power BI calculates that for us. Okay. Now, there's a lot of other functions we can start to work with that are equally as easy to work with. So let me show you a couple of those. We were looking at, implicitly, we were looking at fare amount. So let's look at what that might look like to write some DAX. In this case, we're using the sum function. Works just like the sum function in Excel, but notice that our syntax here is slightly different. We still have the name of our taxi table, but we've also got something here in square brackets. That is the name of a column. So basically, sum, what it wants, is a column name. It's going to take all that data in a column and sum it up for us. Pretty simple. Now let's say that we get mixed up and we just try and pass a table name, no column. Then we're going to get these red squiggly lines. It's going to say, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Can't do that. Okay. And it will give us the option to make that right. Okay. Couple of very simple examples of writing DAX. But let's kind of stop a minute. Put the DAX here in this chart. and then actually think about it in terms of how DAX is calculating this. What's going on in the DAX engine? What's going on behind the scenes of this visual that's getting us these results? Okay, so by simply putting another column of data down here on our x-axis, we have introduced a filter context. And in this case, it is the pickup taxi zones within our model, and it is the name of each zone. This data is a little noisy, so we also get a bunch of blanks. Okay, let's go over to our data model then and demonstrate maybe how we're getting this value right here for the borough Brooklyn. Okay, so here's a look at our model as soon as it loads. There we go. All right, got a nice star schema here, all kinds of dimensions all surrounding this one taxi table where all of our factual information is. So I want you to imagine with me for a moment that we've got a big table of drop-off zones here. And because we need to find out what is going on for Brooklyn, imagine that big table of data here just gets filtered down to the borough Brooklyn. Okay, so we've only got one value selected from this table that we need to calculate to get that bar. Okay, we've got a one-to-many relationship heading away from our dimension towards our fact table. So that filter context, that Brooklyn, it's going to travel down our relationship. It's going to filter the taxi table, and it's going to count all the rows of the table and then return the value. Then it's going to look at the next bar, filter drop off taxi zones to that borough. Filter context is going to flow down the taxi, count the rows again, and return the value and give us the right length of a bar. Same thing would apply if we put that total fair amount, that sum, but rather than counting the rows of our table, that filter context is going to pass from the dimension to the fact, and we're just going to sum up all the data in that total amount column and return that value. Is that all making sense so far to everybody? What's even more interesting is the same thing applies if we're using slicers. So if I change our visual a little bit, let's say I want to know, just look at days of the week. And I want to, we'll stick with Brooklyn. So I want to know how many pickups were there each day of the week in Brooklyn. Got the same idea here that on our date table, we've picked a day name. So there's a filter context for that. And now there's also a filter context on Brooklyn for our pickup borough. Same idea. We've got one filter flowing down here like we were just looking at, but we've also made our context slightly more complex. We've got a day name filter going on here as well. So both filters are flowing back to the taxi table, filtering it appropriately, and then returning the aggregation. Okay? Is that all making sense so far? Okay. That, I think, right there is one of the, if you take one thing away from this talk, being able to kind of visualize what's happening when you build a visual and you add some DAX to it, that's the thing to take away. Not every filter context is going to be that simple. It'll grow in complexity as you build more complex visuals, as you build more complex reports, and as you build more complex DAX. But there's no need to worry about that today. start nice and simple and just really start thinking through that as you build out simple visuals like this one. And it'll help you to start thinking like Power BI is thinking, like SSAS is thinking, like that DAX engine is thinking. It will really help you to start to write better DAX, be able to troubleshoot your DAX down the road when you run into some issues. Okay, we get rid of this chart. We actually get a bunch of operators too that we can work with in DAX. So let me show you. Let's actually write a new DAX measure. And I just want to know what the average fare is per trip, per taxi ride. So write a new measure. Okay, a couple of different ways that I can do this. Again, some of you may be saying, couldn't you just use an average function here? I could. I want to show you something. Okay, in order to know what our average fare is, we need to know what our fare is. Got a measure written for that. And then I will divide by the number of taxi rides. Okay. Now, notice here the syntax is looking a little bit different than what we've seen before. That's because I'm actually writing a new measure that references two other measures. So in this case, total fare amount just sums up the total amount column in our taxi table. Taxi rides we looked at, that's the count rows from our taxi table. So DAX is going to take a look at this. It's going to say, all right, I need to know what that sum is of the total amount. Then I'm going to divide that by the number of rows in our table, and that will give me the new value for average fare per ride. Get to use our good old slash here. That's the divide operator. Okay. And let's just pull that out here on the canvas so we can see a number. That's actually not the way I would recommend doing a divide, though. I'm going to write the same thing, but use DAX's divide function. Okay, so the function is divide. We've got to pass it a numerator and a denominator. Just going to reference our previous measures. Another way you can tell if you're working with a measure, since both measures and columns end up in square brackets, is that all your measures get the nice little measure calculator icon next to them. Okay, we've got an alternate result. This is telling us that we could pass a third argument into this function. Since it's in square brackets there, that is optional, so we don't have to. All we need to do is close out our parentheses, and we've got a new divide function in our model. So I'm going to bring this one out here as well. And if all is well, we see the same answer. But there's a fundamental difference between these two things, and I'll admit that it's not quite as dramatic as of a result in what I'm about to show you as it was, say, like 8 years ago. But you'll see the difference when I introduce a mathematical error into our equation. Sometimes when we're working with data, we end up with scenarios where we might end up trying to divide something by 0. So I'm going to take away taxi rides and try and divide both of these by 0. Show you what the difference is. One of them over here shows us infinity. Now, it used to throw an error, which obviously we don't want in a DAX measure. If there's errors, that's a problem. A blank, though, we can work with. In fact, if we come back to our divide function, put that alternate result in and maybe just say, if we're trying to divide by 0, just give me 0. Cleans up our DAX very, very quickly. So this may not seem like a big deal. You could say, well, in that case, I'll just change some formatting or do something to kind of solve for this. But think about what we're doing in this measure. We're actually referencing 2 other measures. Well, what if this average gets referenced by other measures down the line? What if we have 10 other measures that look back at this average, say a year to date, comparing that to last year to date? All of this infinity is trying to flow down through there, and we're getting some weirdness. So it's a best practice when you're working with DAX to always go with the divide function. Handles this error, or handles something that looks like this infinity much more gracefully. It's a good habit to get in when you're doing division and to learn that early on. All right, we don't need those guys any longer. Doing pretty good on time. So I want to introduce another function to you called calculate. Now this is going to be probably the most common function as you progress down your DAX journey that you're gonna run into. Calculate lets us do some pretty cool stuff. And let me show you what that looks like on this measure. So there's a couple of things going on here. We're writing it, we're wanting to average out how long each taxi ride has taken. Now, I already mentioned that our data here is pretty noisy. So we want to try and get rid of that noise in our calculations. In this particular case, there's a lot of entries where the data either didn't record the duration of the trip. We know that it happened because if we look at the total distance that they drove, we see values there, but we don't know how long it took. So we want to throw those out. If we're averaging, we don't want a bunch of zeros in our average. Doesn't really help us. So what calculate lets us do is perform our aggregation, but apply a filter to that aggregation. So rather than applying a filter, say as a slicer or in the filter pane, we can actually code in our filter. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're saying, give me the average of our duration only when that duration is greater than 0. If it's 0 or if there's nothing, no actual numbers above 0 that we can work with, we don't want to deal with that. Okay. Now, this is a very simple filter, but you can get extremely complex in the kind of filtering that you're doing here. Point here, though, is to just start with these simple things. Values in my column are greater than 0. Values in my column equal some sort of string. Some very simple things like that. Okay, let's actually take a look too at what calculate is asking us for. Okay, it's evaluating an expression in context modified by whatever filters that we place here. We could string together 3 or 4 different filters by adding commas, so we can get more complex even as we're keeping it simple. That sounds paradoxical, but it's possible that we could tell it when we could do something like this and just say, or when our pickup zone borough equals Brooklyn, and now we have a couple of different filters that we're working with. So it's possible for us to do that. But calculate is one that you're really going to want to get used to. In fact, there's a cool little secret about calculate. When we look at a measure like this one, all we see is sum of a column, but the DAX engine, what's actually running our code for us, says, okay, I know you're trying to do a calculation. There's no filters, so you didn't actually write calculate, but I'm going to pretend it's there anyway. As far as I'm concerned, the DAX engine says it's already there. So we're working with calculate all the time, but we only really need to write it if we want to specify some additional filters, at least to get started. There's other reasons you could use calculate. That's way on down the line. That's 400 level stuff, okay? It's good to start getting used to working with calculate and playing with some different filters, because as we get further on into the DAX journey, it's important that we're comfortable with that. There's some extremely nerdy, cool data stuff that we can do when we get used to working with these calculate, with the filters in a calculate function. So that's some examples of how we're going to write DAX in a measure. And again, this is mostly where you're going to be dealing with DAX. Is working in measures, working in these flexible calculations that we can use across a lot of different visuals and a lot of different contexts within a report. In as much as I say, be careful writing a calculated column, I actually think working with calculated columns can be really helpful when you're learning DAX, because you get to see the results of the DAX you're writing very quickly, and you get to see a bunch of results all the way down your column. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of what that looks like, and you'll see what I mean. So I'm going to jump over into the table view, and the first example we're going to look at is we're just going to concatenate some strings. On our date table, we're basically just going to make another column that looks like this date column. Power BI, what we're about to write is not something you'll have to do all the time, but this gives us a good idea of how the DAX works, and we have something to check and validate to make sure that the code works properly here. Okay, so in this view, I clicked new column, okay? And the syntax for writing a calculated column looks just like writing a measure. The only difference is that to get started, we don't see measure equals, we see column equals. So we'll give our new column a name, call it full date. And now we're going to start referencing other columns in this table. So to get that full date, we'll start with day name, space, okay. And we'll use some of the other operators that are available to us in DAX. So a single ampersand is going to concatenate text. Okay. Add a comma in so we can hard code strings. We'll add another concatenation. And what was next? The month name. Okay. Write a space in there, and you get the idea. Week. And finally, we need our year column. So just like that, we've pulled together a bunch of other columns in our date table. And if our code is good, we will get a table of data. Probably should have just used the day column. But this is a great example of being able to see. Now we got a full thing. We got this whole column. We get to see how DAX applied the code we wrote to every row of this table. So thinking back a couple of minutes into our conversation, what do you think is happening here? It's row context. Okay, so DAX had to look at this and say, for this first row, Thursday, January 8th, 2009, I'm going to fix this while we're talking about it. Go take all of these different columns, concatenate them together to give me this string. All right, we're good there. Now let's move on to the next row. Concatenate all of that and give me this result. All the way down, almost 4,500 rows later, and we have a full date column now in our table. So it's important to note that in this particular context, we're not really worried about filters or a filter context because we haven't coded that in. And this new calculated column is only going to refresh. It's only going to update and recalculate if we tell our data model to refresh. So we either hit the refresh button or we publish our report to the Power BI service and tell it to refresh. Same concept applies if you're using calculated columns and analysis services or Power Pivot cubes as well. Anytime that data gets refreshed is when this DAX is going to recalculate. Same would apply if we were talking about calculated tables as well. We'll save that though for another talk. Now, one other common example of using a calculated column would be is in pairing that column with some sort of conditional logic. So I've got a column here called ride share, and I really just wanted to know, was an individual taxi ride a single rider? Did we have multiple passengers riding in that taxi for a particular ride? And so I wanted a column that would show me that. So let's rewrite this column real simply and compare our results. So again, I'm going to hit new column here. Whenever my model cooperates, we will get that. It's unfortunately not the fastest model of all time. Notice here as well, this table is much, much, much larger than our date table. So it's taken a lot longer for us to be able to work with our DAX here. Okay, another thing to consider if you're thinking, I probably should go calculated columns. There can be some performance implications during development that you want to consider. Okay, so we'll use our if function. We want to perform a logical test, then we're going to give it a result if true, and optionally we can tell it what to do if the result is false. All right, so if our passenger count column on the taxi cab table is greater than 1, And I am going to specify the result if false. Just return a couple strings. This may take a couple seconds here to calculate. Yeah, 76 million rows in this table. A little larger. We'll give it just a second. If it takes too long, we'll trust our answer is right. But that's how you can implement an if. Again, just like working with the if function in Excel. Very simple to work with. There it is. So far, so good. We'll let that keep doing its thing. Looks like it's finished there. Most of these were single passengers, but you can see everything completed there. So I'll leave you with a couple tips and a couple resources, and then I'll take some questions. This will only take a second to go through these. A couple things I recommend as you're getting started writing DAX. We saw it in the model we were just looking at, that keeping our DAX measures organized is pretty important. So I recommend doing that by building a metrics table. I'll make this deck available after the talk. I've got a link in here to a post that I wrote about just how you can implement a metrics table if you're not familiar on how to do that. Plus, there's some stuff in that post that talk about how to put your DAX in those folders like I had in our taxi model. Those DAX 101, 201, 301 folders that we saw there. It'll show you how to do that as well. One of the things we didn't really talk about, but that I'll encourage you to explore is using comments so you can document your DAX. Leave yourself some breadcrumbs of what you were doing and why you were doing it. One of the really cool things about DAX is that you can have white space all over the place in that DAX, and DAX is going to ignore it. That's not necessarily the case in all programming languages, but DAX lets us format our code to keep it really readable. As your DAX gets more complex, as your code grows, you'll be really glad that you have learned how to format it. And by formatting it, really what I mean is just using returns, tabbing things over, or keeping spaces in your code between column names and the parentheses and such. Makes things a lot easier to read. And also, once you create a DAX measure, apply formatting to your DAX measures. This may seem like a kind of an obvious one, but taking a moment to apply 1,000 separators, set the right decimal places on all the measures that you create goes a long way in visualizing the DAX measures well. Here's a few resources as well that will help you along the way. I mentioned before Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari. They run a company called SQL BI, and they put out all kinds of terrific references and tools for you to use to make writing DAX easier. DAX Guide is an excellent reference guide that lists out all the DAX functions and how to use them. It's got examples. They have a great blog on their website. This DAX formatter tool, you can copy and paste your DAX code into it, hit format, and it will spit out readable code. Really helpful tool. And then as you progress through your journey, I highly recommend checking out their site, daxpatterns.com. And they give you some reusable kind of code patterns that you can implement for doing more complex calculations. So that's all I got for you guys today. What questions do you all have? What would you like to know? What can I clarify for you? Feel
I have a
free
quick
to
question.
unmute your- Yeah, go ahead.
Do you always recommend creating a separate date table instead of referencing one from like your main table, if that makes sense?
It does make sense. Yes, I do. A date table is going to be necessary once you get to that 300 level. And when you want to start working with time intelligence, you have to have that date table.
Got it.
So I always recommend it. And if you're using like a data warehouse or a data lakehouse as your data source, you've probably got one there that you can leverage.
Okay. And without those scenarios, definitely create one.
That's
because
right.
Okay.
That's right. And if you don't have one, I've actually got another blog that shows you how you can create one using Power Query.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Yeah, anybody else, feel free to unmute and ask or drop it in the chat and we'll catch it. All right, I'm gonna jump over there and look at the chat now. How to create a folder under metrics. Yeah, I can show you that. All right, so to create a folder in the model view, we just want to select a measure. And then this display folder property, you just enter whatever name you want to use there. And when you enter a name, you'll get these nice folders. Really, really handy, especially when you get a lot of DAX measures in your model. John asked if I'm using Copilot for DAX. I have not. I have asked both ChatGPT and another large language model called Perplexity to write some DAX and gotten some varying results. Let's just say that those models don't always know DAX as well. I would have to imagine Copilot's got to have a leg up on some of these other ones, but I have not tried it yet.
Hello. Question.
Hi. Sure.
Sometimes I'll get a relational error to
Mhm.
where if I have like a table that I'm trying to reference to the fact table, it'll tell me it's contradicting with maybe the date table, right? So then one suggestion that I have found on Google was like make a related table instead. Like do that format. Do you know? I mean, can you show us, I guess, how to do that? Because then it's like not a direct. It's not a direct like lookup to the fact. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so. That one, there's a couple of different things that could be going on there. So it's a little tricky. It's a little tricky to show without being able to get into the specifics on it. A couple things that you might check though is just making sure that in your fact table, whatever column you're referencing on is the same format and data type as what's in your date table. And that is what I mean by format is like the same granularity. I've seen some issues where you're maybe trying to join.
It's
Go
not.
ahead.
It's not giving the error of the table I'm trying to join. So let's say I'm trying to join let's say country to the fact table, right? For example, then it'll tell me that that creates I forget what the wording is specifically, but it creates a problem with the date table.
Is it a circular reference?
It's not a circular reference because because it's saying like, let's say the country table is contradicting or causing a problem with the date table, but I'm not trying to relate the two of them. I'm trying to relate so the date table is obviously related to the fact table, right? And then the country table, I'm trying to relate to the fact table. So my workaround is that, let's say on the fact table, I'll just do a lookup
Mhm.
to the country. That's my workaround. But
Gotcha.
obviously, you're creating a heavier the whole, now you're kind of flattening the model, right? So
Right. Yeah, we don't want to do that. Maybe if you take a screenshot of the error and drop it in the chat or email it to me. I don't
Okay.
mind taking a quick look and kind of helping point you in the right direction.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good call, Jason. An ambiguous relationship. Vikram
I was
asked-
wondering if maybe there were.
Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, I was just wondering if there was possibly incorrect cross filter directioning. Maybe that's so sending cross filter information in places it's not supposed to go. Possibly that's a.
Mhm.
I'm not sure. I have to see the model.
That could
Yeah.
be.
Let's see, Douglas, you asked about is DAX better for numerical data than strings? No, it handles both very well. It's more common that we're using it with numerical data, but there's all kinds of stuff we can do with looking up values in strings, concatenating strings, all kinds of stuff. Handles both well. And then there's another question from Vikram about using active and inactive relationships simultaneously in a data model. If that makes sense, then yeah, you can totally do that. You'd want to use the use relationship function as a filter within calculate. And explicitly tell DAX how you intend to use that inactive relationship and to bypass the active relationship. But yeah, done that several times. Works great. Will it affect the performance of the model?
I had a question.
Yeah.
So related to that performance question. I'd love to get your thought on this. So, I actually create active relationships between my date table and any date column in a fact table where appropriate, and then inactive relationships everywhere else to every other date column. And so the model, so Power BI, like so unbeknownst to your typical user, will create auto date tables behind the scenes that I think will bloat the model. I'm not actually sure exactly how much it bloats the model or how much it might hinder performance. But as you create these relationships, you do away with those hidden date tables. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how much that helps, if I'm just wasting my time.
Well, I'll say that I've not done any performance testing on it one way or another, but I also tend to work with dates and that I put date keys on a table rather than actual dates. And so by doing that, that kind of helps me avoid those auto date tables behind the scenes. But I've also turned that feature off because I thought even if the performance hit is minimal, I still don't want it going on. I'd rather just tell the model what dates it needs to be concerned about and where it needs to be concerned about them. That helps me to think through modeling in the DAX better.
Michael, I just had one other question for you, and that was the data set. Where can people find this data set if they want to work with it?
I found that data set actually through Fabric. If you look and if you create a lake house and use a sample data set. There's like 5 or 6 of them that you can pick, and there's one called NYC Green Taxi, and that's where I pulled that from. It was more interesting to me than working with like a Contoso or an AdventureWorks or something, sales stuff. It was just something different.
Yeah.
So that's where I found that one, but they've got some other stuff available that you could play with there.
Jason, do you have access to a pedal tavern data set?
Oh my.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
No, I do
Well,
not.
Sekou had to drop, so if there aren't any other questions, then we're a little bit over time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up if that's okay. So I just wanted to let me share my screen here. One moment. So hopefully you guys are seeing my my PowerPoint deck here. So I just want to remind everybody of our upcoming meetups. So Thursday, June 20th, we're going to have a presentation on KPI visualization and some custom visuals. So that's going to be really fascinating and a great continuation and application for the DAX journey that we've learned today. And there's also going to be a Microsoft Fabric 2024 in review panel discussion on Thursday, July 18th. We'll have those up on the meetup website soon. So once we do get those up, we'll send out some communications about that, so be sure to sign up. Michael, this has been a really terrific presentation, and I can't wait for the 200 and the 300 and the 400 classes. I know that theirs are going to be great. So so definitely crank those out, and I know that they'll be a great advantage to me and to so many other people. Michael, thank you for all your work, and we appreciate everybody who had an opportunity to come study some DAX with us.
Right. Yes. Thank you, everybody. Lots of good questions. Thanks for hanging out. Yeah. No, thank you, Michael. Your feedback is always valuable.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah, Todd, the recording is going to be sent out. We should we typically upload to get it sent out within 24 hours.
Okay, so there'll be an email link to it.
Yes. So so I typically post the link on the actual meetup page, and I think it goes out to everybody who RSVP'd for the meetup.
Okay.
Also, somebody's asking about where can they find past recordings. Same places you'll find this one, which is on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and search for Nashville Power BI User Group, hopefully should pop right up. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. And I look forward to next month.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
See you all soon.
Bye.